A police K9 refused to move from one spot. No one understood why until they dug deeper. What was buried there left the entire town stunned, something no one saw coming. Here's the full story. But before we roll into it, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you're subscribed. The sun had barely broken the horizon when the quiet of the small town was pierced by the sound of police radios crackling to life. Officers had gathered at a local construction site after workers reported something unusual the previous evening. At first, it sounded like nothing more than a precaution, just another routine check. But no one realized how quickly the atmosphere would shift from ordinary to unsettling. Among the officers stood a seasoned handler with his trusted partner, a K9 named Rex. Rex was no ordinary dog. He had been trained in search, rescue, and detection, with a record of saving lives and unearthing evidence that human eyes often missed. But on this day, his instincts would lead the entire department into a mystery that none of them expected. The workers had described it simply. They were preparing to clear a section of land near the tree line when Rex suddenly froze. His handler noticed it immediately. The dog's entire posture stiffened, ears high, nose lifted. Then, without warning, Rex pulled hard on the leash and sprinted toward a specific patch of ground right beside a half-fallen oak tree. The handler allowed him to lead, expecting him to sniff briefly and move on. But Rex did not move on. He lowered himself close to the ground, pawing at the dirt, then looking back at his handler with sharp, insistent eyes. Dogs often reacted to scents, but this was different. Rex was refusing to leave the spot. No commands, no distractions, nothing could make him walk away. His chest heaved with short, forceful breaths as he clawed at the soil. It was unusual enough for the handler to call it in. Soon, the site that should have been bustling with machines and workers was quiet except for the sound of Rex's paws scratching at the earth. The officers began circling the area, unsure of what they were looking for, but unable to dismiss the urgency in the animal's behavior. The first shovel of dirt was taken cautiously. No one knew what to expect. At first it looked like nothing, just loose soil and some old roots. But Rex's intensity did not waver. His growl rumbled low, his tail stiff as if every nerve in his body was locked on whatever was hidden beneath. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Had Rex detected the scent of something dangerous? Buried contraband? Or something worse? The idea of remains, human or animal, crept into their thoughts, and the air grew heavier with every passing moment. Still, they dug slowly, peeling back layer after layer of soil. Each scrape of the shovel sounded louder than it should have. Every pause raised more questions. Why this spot? What had been left here? And why was Rex so determined not to move? A growing crowd of curious workers stood at the edge of the scene. The usual noise of construction was gone, replaced by murmurs and nervous whispers. The officers could feel it too, an unspoken sense that they were about to uncover something that would not sit lightly on their shoulders. The handler kept his eyes on Rex, watching for any change. But Rex's stance told him everything. Do not stop. Hours stretched into the morning as the digging grew deeper. At about 2 feet down, one officer's shovel struck something hard. Everyone froze. The sound echoed through the stillness. Was it just a rock? Or something more deliberate? They cleared the soil carefully, brushing away dirt with their gloved hands. A piece of wood emerged, splintered and darkened with age. At first it seemed like part of an old root. But as more dirt was swept aside, the shape became clearer. It was not natural. It was cut, squared at the edges. A wooden box. The box was weathered, worn, and half decayed. It had clearly been buried for a long time, maybe years. The officers knelt around it, brushing it clean, while Rex stood over them, growling low, his body taut like a drawn bowstring. Why had it been buried here? Who had placed it? And more importantly, what was inside? The box was pried carefully from the soil. The crowd leaned in as the officers set it down on the ground. It was heavy, sealed shut with rusted nails and a lock that had long since broken away. When the lid creaked open, the contents inside left everyone silent. At first glance, it appeared to be a collection of papers. They were yellowed, fragile, bound with string, and buried alongside small metal objects that caught the light. The officers exchanged confused looks. They had expected something sinister, but this was different. The papers were carefully removed. They looked like letters, but the writing was smudged and faded. Alongside them was a tarnished badge, barely recognizable, and a cracked leather wallet that had almost disintegrated. The wallet held an identification card so old it looked like it belonged to a different era. The name was faint, the picture barely visible, but it was enough to suggest that whoever had buried this box had wanted it hidden and remembered. The officers turned to one another, uncertain of what to make of it. The crowd leaned closer, whispering theories. Was it evidence from an old case, a forgotten officer, or something planted deliberately? But Rex was not finished. As soon as the box was lifted, Rex lunged again, not away, but deeper toward the hole. His handler struggled to hold him back. The dog's claws raked the soil, his nose pressed hard against the earth. It was not just the box. There was more beneath. The officers looked at each other. The decision was quick. They began digging again, widening the hole. The soil grew darker, damper. The deeper they went, the stronger Rex's agitation became. He barked sharply now, tail rigid, muscles trembling with focus. At 4 feet, the shovel struck something again. This time it was not wood. The sound was dull, muted. The officers exchanged a tense glance, then knelt down to uncover it. Slowly, the shape came into view, rounded, wrapped in fabric that had long since frayed. The earth clung to it stubbornly as if hiding it from daylight. The crowd held their breath. One of the officers brushed it gently, then froze. This was no box, no tool, no forgotten object. It was bone. The realization rippled through the scene like a chill wind. Workers stepped back. Officers grew silent. The handler's grip tightened on Rex's leash, though the dog had no intention of leaving. His eyes locked onto the ground as if to say, "I told you, keep going." The soil gave way slowly, revealing more. A skeletal form. Incomplete, broken by time, but unmistakably human. The tattered fabric seemed like the remnants of a uniform, though it was too far gone to tell clearly. Questions erupted in every mind. Whose remains were these? How long had they been here? And what was the connection to the letters and badge in the box? The sheriff on scene ordered the area sealed off. Forensics would need to be called, but even as the protocols kicked in, the unease lingered. It was not just the discovery itself. It was how Rex had known, how he had refused to move until they uncovered it, almost as if he had been led by something greater than scent alone. News spread quickly. By afternoon, the once quiet construction site was crowded with officials, investigators, and onlookers trying to catch a glimpse of what had been unearthed. Reporters whispered about long-buried secrets, old unsolved cases, and the possibility that this was more than a random discovery. The letters from the box were sent off for analysis. The badge was examined carefully. Early speculation suggested that it belonged to a law enforcement officer from decades ago, though the department's records would take time to confirm. The remains, fragile and fragmented, were removed with painstaking care. Forensics experts noted that the burial seemed deliberate, not accidental. Someone had wanted these bones hidden. But why bury the letters and badge alongside them? Was it a sign of respect or a cover-up? Rex stayed restless long after the digging stopped. His handler tried to ease him, but the dog's posture never fully relaxed, as though he knew the mystery was only beginning to unfold. That night, the officers gathered in the precinct, poring over what little they had. The letters, though faded, bore a name that was still legible, the same name that appeared faintly on the old identification card. It matched an officer reported missing nearly 50 years ago, an officer who had vanished during a patrol and was never found. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. The case had been cold for decades, written off as unsolvable. Families had moved on, files had gathered dust, But now, because of Rex, the truth was clawing its way back into the light. But the mystery was far from over. Why had the remains been buried here? Who had placed them? And why had they been left undiscovered for so long? Rex lay at his handler's feet, his eyes half shut but his body still tense, as if he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The spot he refused to leave had given up its first secret. But deep down, everyone sensed it was only the beginning. The precinct was unusually still. Papers spread across the table, the old badge catching faint glimmers of light as though refusing to be ignored. Officers sat around it, leaning forward with the kind of tension that only came when history clawed its way back to the present. Rex sat beneath the table, eyes open, ears twitching at every sound. His presence anchored the room, reminding them all that none of this would have surfaced without him. He had chosen the spot, refused to leave, and forced human eyes to see what had been hidden in plain earth for nearly half a century. But what exactly had they uncovered? The name that appeared faintly on the weathered ID card and in the letters was Officer Samuel Greer, a name that, for older members of the force, stirred faint echoes of a story many thought was long buried itself. In 1947, Officer Greer had vanished during what was supposed to be a routine patrol on the outskirts of town. The case baffled the department. His patrol car was later found abandoned near an old road, but there was no trace of him. No struggle, no evidence, no witnesses. Rumors swirled at the time. Some believed he had walked away from his duties, choosing to disappear. Others were convinced he had been silenced after stumbling upon something he was not meant to see. The department had launched a search, but without leads it faded into a cold case. For the younger officers listening now, it sounded like a story from another era. For the older ones, it was a painful memory resurfacing with new teeth. And it all connected back to the oak tree, the wooden box, and the remains Rex had insisted they dig up. But questions pressed harder than answers. If these were indeed Officer Greer's remains, why were they buried here instead of being hidden elsewhere? Why include his badge and personal belongings in a box? And more troubling, who buried him and why had no one spoken of it? The letters, though fragile, became the focal point. Each was written in hurried, uneven strokes as if penned in secrecy. The words were smeared by time, but key phrases were still legible. Cannot trust. They are watching. If anything happens to me, you will know why. The room grew heavier as the officers read line after line. It painted a picture of a man who felt hunted, who sensed betrayal closing in. The last line, though nearly lost in fading ink, stood out. I will hide the truth where only someone loyal enough will ever find it. The words raised hairs on the back of necks. Was Rex's discovery pure instinct, or something more profound like loyalty crossing time? The handler scratched Rex gently behind the ears, staring at the letters. The coincidence was too strong. Greer had hidden his truth in the earth, and decades later a police K-9 had unearthed it. Digging into old records revealed another layer. At the time of Officer Greer's disappearance, there had been whispers of corruption in the department. Nothing had ever been proven, but his letters seemed to confirm it. He believed someone on the inside was working against him. The realization landed like a stone in water. If true, Greer had not just been another missing officer. He had been silenced. But who had done it? And why choose this isolated spot for the burial? Even stranger, why leave behind the very evidence that could expose the crime? Theories clashed in the room. Some thought the burial was rushed, the belongings hidden quickly in fear of discovery. Others argued it was deliberate, a twisted attempt to keep Greer's memory tied to the earth he once patrolled. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Was this the full truth, or was there more still hidden beneath? Late that evening, after investigators left, the handler brought Rex back to the site. He had noticed something during the day that unsettled him. Rex had remained restless, even after the remains were lifted. Now, under the dim light of portable lamps, Rex pulled toward the same tree line again. Not exactly the same spot, but close. He pawed at the ground, his whines sharp, his nose pressing into soil that had not yet been disturbed. The handler's chest tightened. Could it be possible that there was more buried here? He radioed in backup. Within the hour, shovels scraped against dirt again, guided by a dog who refused to leave until the full story surfaced. At 2 feet, they found more wood, another box, smaller than the first. Its nails were rusted, its surface warped, but it was intact. The officers exchanged looks heavy with both dread and anticipation. What could be inside? This time, they opened it with extra care. The hinges groaned and the lid lifted slowly. Inside was not paper, not clothing, not metal. It was a revolver, rusted but unmistakably a service weapon. Beside it lay a notebook, the pages stiff but legible. The first few entries seemed ordinary, notes on patrols, descriptions of shifts. But deeper into the notebook, the handwriting grew frantic. One entry stopped everyone cold. I know they are setting me up. I saw what I should not have. The money, the handoffs. I cannot trust anyone now. If this gun is found, it means I was right. It means they silenced me. The air turned thick with silence. This was no longer a mystery of a missing man. It was a direct accusation from the grave. The letters, the badge, the remains, and now the notebook, all pointed to the same chilling conclusion. Officer Samuel Greer had uncovered corruption, and someone in uniform had made sure his voice was never heard again. News outlets latched onto the discovery. The community, once quiet and unsuspecting, was shaken to its core. Families who remembered Greer spoke with both sorrow and anger. He had been described as honest, devoted, unwilling to look the other way. Now his story painted him as a man betrayed by the very institution he served. But suspicion cast long shadows. If corruption had existed back then, had it been fully erased, or did echoes still remain in the department today? The sheriff himself ordered a thorough review of historical files, determined to uncover whether any names from that era matched current families or ties in town. And through it all, Rex remained restless. The handler noticed it in his eyes. The dog was not satisfied. The revolver and notebook were pieces of a puzzle, but the puzzle itself was incomplete, almost as if Greer's final words, "Hide the truth where only someone loyal enough will find it," still pointed to something more. Days passed, investigations deepened, and the site became a place of constant watch. Forensics confirmed the remains were indeed Samuel Greer. The weapon was issued to him, though the barrel had been wiped clean decades ago. Still, something gnawed at the investigators. The second box felt too carefully placed, as if guiding them rather than hiding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Rex tugged his handler once more toward the oak tree. This time, instead of scratching at the soil, he circled the trunk, nose lifted high. He barked sharply, staring at a hollow near the roots. The handler leaned down, reaching inside. His fingers brushed against something hard. Pulling it free, he revealed a third object, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed against time. When the cloth was unwrapped, everyone fell silent. It was a roll of photographs, black and white, the images clear despite age. And what they showed was damning. Men in uniform, faces grim, standing beside crates of money and unmarked vehicles. Proof. Proof of the corruption Greer had seen. Proof of why he had been silenced. But among the faces was one that made the officer's blood run cold. An officer who had risen through the ranks, whose family name still carried weight in the town today. The secret had been buried for 50 years. Now it was clawing back into the light. The precinct buzzed with tension. The photographs, the notebook, the letters, all threads woven into a dark fabric of betrayal. But as investigators spread the photographs across the table, Rex whined, low and uneasy. His handler frowned. Because the dog's instincts were clear. The mystery was not yet over. There was still something left to be uncovered, something even more shocking than the remains, the gun, or the photographs. Something that would change not just the department, but the entire town. The precinct had not seen this level of unrest in decades. Officers who had joined the force in recent years were stunned into silence, while the older generation wore expressions that mixed disbelief with guilt. The photographs laid out across the table were undeniable. Men in uniform, standing where they should never have stood. Crates stacked like towers, each filled with bundles of cash. Vehicles with plates obscured, faces caught in candid exposure. And at the center of it all, one man, an officer of rank, smiling faintly as though proud of what they had concealed. The name beneath the photograph hit like a storm: Captain William Harlow. In his time, Harlow had been respected, trusted, even revered. He had retired decades ago with honors, his family still living in town with his name etched in civic pride. But the evidence now revealed another truth. He had been at the core of corruption, orchestrating a network that smuggled and profited while silencing anyone who stood in the way. And Samuel Greer, the officer who vanished in 1974, had been one of those who stood in the way. The revelations weighed heavily, but Rex was not yet finished. Even as investigators documented the photographs, the K9 paced restlessly. His handler noticed it again, the same unease, the same refusal to settle. It was late, the night air pressing cool against the earth at the excavation site. Yet Rex's nose pulled sharply toward the far side of the oak where roots tangled in knots above ground. He barked once, twice, then began digging feverishly at a small mound of soil tucked beneath the roots. The handler followed instinct as much as the dog. He knelt, pushing dirt aside with his own hands. His fingers struck something metal, cold and solid. It was not another box. It was a small lockbox, rusted but intact, heavier than it looked. The officers gathered quickly, prying it open with careful force. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, lay rolls of documents, typed reports, signed affidavits, and detailed logs. Greer had not just written letters, he had gathered evidence. The documents named names, dates, shipments, and amounts of money exchanged. They exposed not just Harlow, but several other officers who had since passed on or moved away. It was a ledger of corruption so meticulous that it left no doubt. Greer had uncovered it all, and for that, he had paid with his life. The room grew heavier as every piece clicked into place, the revolver buried beside him, Greer's service weapon removed to make him appear abandoned, the letters, a warning of betrayal, the badge and wallet, left behind as if to preserve his honor, to ensure his identity could one day be reclaimed. The photographs, a visual capture of crimes the town never suspected. And now the lockbox, final proof. It was no longer a mystery of what happened, it was a story of why. Greer had been silenced by those he worked beside. They buried him and his evidence deep beneath the oak tree, believing the soil would guard their secret forever. But 50 years later, loyalty came in another form, through Rex, a dog who refused to walk away until every truth was clawed back into daylight. News of the discovery spread across the community like wildfire. Families who had lived under the shadow of unanswered questions felt a swell of emotion, anger, grief, vindication. Samuel Greer's name, once lost to history, was spoken again with reverence. For those who had doubted him, for those who had whispered that he might have abandoned his post, the truth came like a cleansing storm. Greer had not betrayed the badge had betrayed him. The department issued a public statement vowing transparency. A memorial was planned, and the evidence collected was sealed for presentation to both state and federal investigators, ensuring that every corner of Greer's work would be examined. But for the handler, and for Rex, the satisfaction was not just in solving a case, it was in the unspoken connection, a bridge across decades. Weeks later, under a sky painted by morning light, the town gathered in front of the precinct. Flags flew at half-mast, and a portrait of Samuel Greer, restored from the faded ID, stood proudly at the center. The sheriff spoke with a voice thick with emotion, recounting the sacrifice Greer had made, the corruption he had fought against, and the way his story had been silenced until one loyal K9 refused to let it remain hidden. Greer's surviving relatives, grown old now, wept openly. They had lived their lives without knowing the truth, clinging only to fragments of hope. Now at last they had answers, and justice, even if delayed, had found its way home. And then came the moment that stole every heart present. Rex, dressed in his polished canine vest, was led forward by his handler. The crowd fell into a hush as the sheriff knelt, placing a medal gently around the dog's neck. "This officer," the sheriff said, his voice steady, "uncovered the truth we failed to see. Without him, this story would have remained buried forever." Today, we honor not only Samuel Greer but also Rex, whose loyalty ensured his voice was finally heard. The applause that followed was not just for the ceremony. It was for the bond between man and dog, for the perseverance of truth, and for the justice that had at last broken free of the soil. Looking back, the story formed a haunting symmetry. Greer had written, "I will hide the truth where only someone loyal enough will find it." Rex had embodied that loyalty, decades later, guided not by words but by instinct, by an unshakable sense of rightness. The remains confirmed the betrayal. The letters spoke of danger. The revolver represented his silence. The notebook chronicled his fear. The photographs exposed the faces of corruption. And the lockbox sealed the case beyond denial. Every clue connected. Every secret found its place. The puzzle was no longer fragments. It was a complete picture. For the town, the case of Samuel Greer was finally closed, but in a way that restored his name rather than burying it further. His story became a reminder of courage, of sacrifice, and of the unbreakable duty of the badge when carried with honor. For his family, it was closure. They could stand at his grave, no longer haunted by questions, but proud of the truth that had finally come to light. And for Rex, it was a triumph beyond measure. His handler often looked at him with quiet awe, knowing that it was not training alone that had led him to that oak tree, but something deeper. Some connection across time, bridging the loyalty of one officer and the loyalty of another. Rex had refused to leave the spot until the truth was free, and because of him, the truth was not only uncovered, it was honored. As the sun set behind the precinct that evening, the handler watched Rex lying peacefully at his side, finally at ease. The dog had done what no one else could. He had dug up the past, and in doing so, given everyone a future built not on silence, but on truth. We drop these kind of stories. Every day, every time a canine steps in, the truth that comes out is bigger than the last. Don't get left behind. Hit like, subscribe, and be here when the next twist drops.